Chapter 5. Black Souls in White Skins. At the first General Students' Council of SASO in July 1970, Steve was succeeded as president by Barney Pityana. Steve was elected chairman of SASO Publications. The following month, the monthly SASO newsletter began to appear, carrying articles by himself called, quote-unquote, I Write What I Like, and signed Frank Talk. At the BPC SASO trial, the judge at one point interjected, quote, Isn't accused number 9, Srini Moodley, Frank Talk? To which Steve replied, No, he was never Frank Talk. I was Frank Talk. This article and the one that follows, from the August and September 1970 issues of the newsletter respectively, give an authentic exposition of the philosophy of black consciousness. I write what I like. The following is the first of a series of articles under the above topic that will appear regularly in our newsletter. Black Souls in White Skins. Basically, the South African white community is a homogeneous community. It is a community of people who sit to enjoy a privileged position that they do not deserve, are aware of this, and therefore spend their time trying to justify why they are doing so. Where differences in political opinion exist, they are in the process of trying to justify their position of privilege and their usurpation of power. With their theory of, quote, separate freedoms for the various nations in the multinational state of South Africa, end quote, the nationalists have gone a long way towards giving most of white South Africa some sort of moral explanation for what is happening. Everyone is quite content to point out that these people, meaning the blacks, will be free when they are ready to run their own affairs in their own areas. What more could they possibly hope for? But these are not the people we are concerned with. We are concerned with that curious bunch of nonconformists who explain their participation in negative terms. That bunch of do-gooders that goes under all sorts of names. Liberals, leftists, etc. These are the people who argue that they are not responsible for white racism and the country's quote-unquote inhumanity to the black man. These are the people who claim that they too feel the oppression just as acutely as the blacks and therefore should be jointly involved in the black man's struggle for a place under the sun. In short, these are the people who say that they have black souls wrapped up in white skins. The role of the white liberal in the black man's history in South Africa is a curious one. Very few black organizations were not under white direction. True to their image, the white liberals always knew what was good for the blacks and told them so. The wonder of it all is that the black people have believed in them for so long. It was only at the end of the 50s that the blacks started demanding to be their own guardians. Nowhere is the arrogance of the liberal ideology demonstrated so well as in their insistence that the problems of the country can only be solved by a bilateral approach involving both black and white. This has, by and large, come to be taken in all seriousness as the modus operandi in South Africa by all those who claim they would like a change in the status quo. Hence, the multiracial political organizations and parties and the, quote, non-racial student organizations, all of which insist on integration not only as an end goal, but also as a means. The integration they talk about is first of all artificial in that it is a response to conscious maneuver rather than to the dictates of the inner soul. In other words, the people forming the integrated complex have been extracted from various segregated societies with their inbuilt complexes of superiority and inferiority, and these continue to manifest themselves even in the quote-unquote non-racial setup of the integrated complex. As a result, the integration so achieved is a one-way course, with the whites doing all the talking and the blacks the listening. Let me hasten to say that I am not claiming that segregation is necessarily the natural order. However, given the facts of the situation where a group experiences privilege at the expense of others, then it becomes obvious that a hastily arranged integration cannot be the solution to the problem. It is rather like expecting the slave to work together with the slave master's son to remove all the conditions leading to the former's enslavement. Secondly, this type of integration as it means is almost always unproductive. The participants waste lots of time in an internal sort of mudslinging designed to prove that A is more of a liberal than B. In other words, the lack of common ground for solid identification is all the time manifested in internal strifes inside the group. It will not sound anachronistic to anybody genuinely interested in real integration to learn that blacks are asserting themselves in a society where they are being treated as perpetual under-16s. One does not need to plan for or actively encourage real integration. Once the various groups within a given community have asserted themselves to the point that mutual respect has to be shown, then you have the ingredients for a true and meaningful integration. At the heart of true integration is the provision for each man, each group to rise and attain the envisioned self. Each group must be able to attain its style of existence without encroaching on or being thwarted by another. Out of this mutual respect for each other and complete freedom of self-determination, there will obviously arise a genuine fusion of the lifestyles of the various groups. This is true integration. From this, it becomes clear that as long as blacks are suffering from inferiority complex, a result of 300 years of deliberate oppression, denigration, and derision, they will be useless as co-architects of a normal society where man is nothing else but man for his own sake. Hence, what is necessary as a prelude to anything else that may come is a very strong grassroots buildup of black consciousness, such that blacks can learn to assert themselves and stake their rightful claim. Thus, in adopting the line of a non-racial approach, the liberals are playing their old game. They are claiming a, quote, monopoly on intelligence and moral judgments, end quote, and setting the pattern and pace for the realization of the black man's aspirations. They want to remain in good books with both the black and white worlds. They want to shy away from all forms of extremisms, condemning white supremacy as being just as bad as black power. They vacillate between the two worlds, verbalizing all the complaints of the blacks beautifully, while skillfully extracting what suits them from the exclusive pool of white privileges. But ask them for a moment to give a concrete, meaningful program that they intend adopting. Then you will see on whose side they really are. Their protests are directed at and appeal to white conscience. Everything they do is directed at finally convincing the white electorate that the black man is also a man, and that at some future date he should be given a place at the white man's table. The myth of integration, as propounded under the banner of liberal ideology, must be cracked and killed, because it makes people believe that something is being done when in actual fact the artificial integrated circles are a soporific on the blacks and provide a vague satisfaction for the guilty stricken whites. It works on a false premise that because it is difficult to bring people from different races together in this country, therefore achievement of this is in itself a step forward toward the total liberation of the blacks. Nothing could be more irrelevant and therefore misleading. Those who believe in it are living in a fool's paradise. First, the black-white circles are almost always a creation of white liberals. As a testimony to their claim of complete identification with the blacks, they call a few quote-unquote intelligent and articulate blacks to come around for tea at home, where all present ask each other the same old hackneyed question: how can we bring about change in South Africa? The more such tea parties one calls, the more of a liberal he is, and the freer he shall feel from the guilt that harasses and binds his conscience. Hence he moves around his white circles, whites-only hotels, beaches, restaurants, and cinemas, with a lighter load, feeling that he is not like the rest of the others. Yet at the back of his mind is a constant reminder that he is quite comfortable as things stand, and therefore should not bother about change. Although he does not vote for the Nats, now that they are in the majority anyway, he feels quite secure under the protection offered by the Nats, and subconsciously shuns the idea of a change. This is what demarcates the liberal from the black world. The liberals view the oppression of blacks as a problem that has to be solved, an eyesore spoiling an otherwise beautiful view. From time to time, the liberals make themselves forget about the problem or take their eyes off the eyesore. On the other hand, in oppression, the blacks are experiencing a situation from which they are unable to escape at any given moment. Theirs is a struggle to get out of the situation and not merely to solve a peripheral problem, as in the case of the liberals. This is why blacks speak with a greater sense of urgency than whites. A game at which the liberals have become masters is that of deliberate evasiveness. The question often comes up, what can I do? If you ask him to do something like stopping to use segregated facilities or dropping out of varsity to do work at menial jobs like all blacks, or defying and denouncing all provisions that make him privileged, you always get the answer: but that's unrealistic. While this may be true, it only serves to illustrate the fact that no matter what a white man does, the color of his skin, his passport to privilege, will always put him miles ahead of the black man. Thus, in the ultimate analysis, no white person can escape being part of the oppressor camp. There exists among men, because they are men, a solidarity through which each shares responsibility for every injustice and every wrong committed in the world, and especially for crimes that are committed in his presence or of which he cannot be ignorant. This description of metaphysical guilt explains adequately that white racism, quote, is only possible because whites are indifferent to suffering and patient with cruelty, end quote, meted out to the black man. Instead of involving themselves in an all-out attempt to stamp out racism from their white society, liberals waste lots of time trying to prove to as many blacks as they can find that they are liberal. This arises out of the false belief that we are faced with a black problem. There is nothing the matter with blacks. The problem is white racism, and it rests squarely on the laps of the white society. The sooner the liberals realize this, the better for us blacks. Their presence amongst us is irksome and of nuisance value. It removes the focus of attention from essentials and shifts it to ill-defined philosophical concepts that are both irrelevant to the black man and merely a red herring across the track. White liberals must leave blacks to take care of their own business, while they concern themselves with the real evil in our society: white racism. Secondly, the black-white mixed circles are static circles with neither direction nor program. The same questions are asked, and the same naivete exhibited in answering them. The real concern of the group is to keep the group going, rather than being useful. In this sort of setup, one sees a perfect example of what oppression has done to the blacks. They have been made to feel inferior for so long that for them it is comforting to drink tea, wine, or beer with whites who seem to treat them as equals. This serves to boost up their own ego, to the extent of making them feel slightly superior to those blacks who do not get similar treatment from whites. These are the sort of blacks who are a danger to the community. Instead of directing themselves at their black brothers and looking at their common problems from a common platform, they choose to sing out their lamentations to an apparently sympathetic audience that has become proficient in saying the chorus of shame. These dull-witted, self-centered blacks are in the ultimate analysis as guilty of the arrest of progress as their white friends, for it is from such groups that the theory of gradualism emanates, and this is what keeps the blacks confused and always hoping that one day God will step down from heaven to solve their problems. It is people from such groups who keep on scanning the papers daily to detect any sign of the change they patiently await without working for. When Helen Suzman's footnote, at that time and for many years the only Progressive Party MP, editor's note, end of footnote, majority is increased by a couple of thousand, regarded as a major milestone in their quote-unquote inevitable change. Nobody looks at the other side of the coin, the large-scale removals of Africans from the urban areas, or the impending zoning of places like Gray Street in Durban, and a myriad of other manifestations of change for the worse. Does this mean that I am against integration? If by integration you understand a breakthrough into white society by blacks, and assimilation and acceptance of blacks into an already established set of norms and code of behavior set up by and maintained by whites, then yes, I am against it. I am against the superior-inferior white-black stratification that makes the white a perpetual teacher and the black a perpetual pupil, and a poor one at that. I am against the intellectual arrogance of white people that makes them believe that white leadership is a sine qua non in this country, and that whites are the divinely appointed pace setters in progress. I am against the fact that a settler minority should impose an entire system of values on an indigenous people. If on the other hand by integration you mean there shall be free participation by all members of a society, catering for the full expression of the self in a freely changing society as determined by the will of the people, then I am with you. For one cannot escape the fact that the culture shared by the majority group in any given society must ultimately determine the broad direction taken by the joint culture of that society. This need not cramp the style of those who feel differently, but on the whole, a country in Africa, in which the majority of the people are African, must inevitably exhibit African values and be truly African in style. What of the claim that the blacks are becoming racist? This is a favorite pastime of frustrated liberals who feel their trusteeship ground being washed off from under their feet. These self-appointed trustees of black interests boast of years of experience in their fight for the rights of the blacks. They have been doing things for blacks, on behalf of blacks, and because of blacks. When the blacks announce that the time has come for them to do things for themselves and all by themselves, all white liberals shout blue murder. Hey, you can't do that. You're being a racist. You're falling into their trap. Apparently, it's all right with the liberals as long as you remain caught by their trap. Those who know define racism as discrimination by a group against another for the purposes of subjugation or maintaining subjugation. In other words, one cannot be a racist unless he has the power to subjugate. What blacks are doing is merely to respond to a situation in which they find themselves the objects of white racism. We are in the position in which we are because of our skin. We are collectively segregated against. What can be more logical than for us to respond as a group? When workers come together under the auspices of a trade union to strive for the betterment of their condition, nobody expresses surprise in the Western world. It is the done thing. Nobody accuses them of separatist tendencies. Teachers fight their battles. Garbage men do the same. Nobody acts as a trustee for another. Somehow, however, when blacks want to do their thing, the liberal establishment seems to detect an anomaly. This is in fact a counter-anomaly. The anomaly was there in the first instance when the liberals were presumptuous enough to think that it behooved them to fight the battle for the blacks. The liberal must understand that the days of the noble savage are gone, that the blacks do not need a go-between in this struggle for their own emancipation. No true liberal should feel any resentment at the growth of black consciousness. Rather, all true liberals should realize that the place for their fight for justice is within their white society. The liberals must realize that they themselves are oppressed if they are true liberals, and therefore they must fight for their own freedom, and not that of the nebulous they with whom they can hardly claim identification. The liberal must apply himself with absolute dedication to the idea of educating his white brothers that the history of the country may have to be rewritten at some stage, and that we may live in a country where color will not serve to put a man in a box. The blacks have heard enough of this. In other words, the liberal must serve as a lubricating material so that as we change the gears in trying to find a better direction for South Africa, there should be no grinding noises of metal against metal, but a free and easy-flowing movement which will be characteristic of a well-looked-after vehicle. Frank Talk. Chapter 6. We Blacks. I write what I like. In the last issue, I took a look at a section of the white community. Today, I propose to concern myself with the black world. The validity of the new approach. We blacks. Born shortly before 1948, footnote, the year in which the Nationalist Party came to power, end of footnote. I have lived all my conscious life in the framework of institutionalized separate development. My friendships, my love, my education, my thinking, and every other facet of my life have been carved and shaped within the context of separate development. In stages during my life, I have managed to outgrow some of the things the system taught me. Hopefully, what I propose to do now is to take a look at those who participate in opposition to the system, not from a detached point of view, but from the point of view of a black man, conscious of the urgent need for an understanding of what is involved in the new approach. Black consciousness. One needs to understand the basics before setting up a remedy. A number of the organizations now currently, quote-unquote, fighting against apartheid are working on an oversimplified premise. They have taken a brief look at what is and have diagnosed the problem incorrectly. They have almost completely forgotten about the side effects and have not even considered the root cause. Hence, whatever is improvised as a remedy will hardly cure the condition. Apartheid, both petty and grand, is obviously evil. Nothing can justify the arrogant assumption that a clique of foreigners has the right to decide on the lives of a majority. Hence, even carried out faithfully and fairly, the policy of apartheid would merit condemnation and vigorous opposition from the indigenous peoples as well as those who see the problem in its correct perspective. The fact that apartheid has been tied up with white supremacy, capitalist exploitation, and deliberate oppression makes the problem much more complex. Material want is bad enough, but coupled with spiritual poverty, it kills. And this latter effect is probably the one that creates mountains of obstacles in the normal course of emancipation of the black people. One should not waste time here dealing with manifestations of material want of the black people. A vast literature has been written on this problem. Possibly a little should be said about spiritual poverty. What makes the black man fail to tick? Is he convinced of his own accord of his inabilities? Does he lack in his genetic makeup that rare quality that makes a man willing to die for the realization of his aspirations? Or is he simply a defeated person? The answer to this is not a clear-cut one. The logic behind white domination is to prepare the black man for the subservient role in this country. Not so long ago, this used to be freely said in Parliament, even about the educational system of the black people. It is still said even today, although in a much more sophisticated language. To a large extent, the evildoers have succeeded in producing at the output end of their machine a kind of black man who is a man only in form. This is the extent to which the process of dehumanization has advanced. Black people under the Smuts government were oppressed, but they were still men. They failed to change the system for many reasons, which we shall not consider here. But the type of black man we have today has lost his manhood. Reduced to an obliging shell, he looks with awe at the white power structure and accepts what he regards as the quote-unquote inevitable position. Deep inside, his anger mounts at the accumulating insult, but he vents it in the wrong direction, on his fellow man in the township, on the property of black people. No longer does he trust leadership, for the 1963 mass arrests were blamable on bungling by the leadership, nor is there any to trust. In the privacy of his toilet, his face twists in silent condemnation of white society, but brightens up in sheepish obedience as he comes out hurrying in response to his master's impatient call. In the homebound bus or train, he joins the chorus that roundly condemns the white man, but is first to praise the government in the presence of the police or his employers. His heart yearns for the comfort of white society and makes him blame himself for not having been quote-unquote educated enough to warrant such luxury. Celebrated achievements by whites in the field of science, which he understands only hazily, serve to make him rather convinced of the futility of resistance and to throw away any hopes that change may ever come. All in all, the black man has become a shell, a shadow of man, completely defeated, drowning in his own misery, a slave, an ox, bearing the yoke of oppression with sheepish timidity. This is the first truth, bitter as it may seem, that we have to acknowledge before we can start on any program designed to change the status quo. It becomes more necessary to see the truth as it is if you realize that the only vehicle for change are these people who have lost their personality. The first step, therefore, is to make the black man come to himself, to pump back life into his empty shell, to infuse him with pride and dignity, to remind him of his complicity in the crime of allowing himself to be misused and therefore letting evil reign supreme in the country of his birth. This is what we mean by an inward-looking process. This is the definition of black consciousness. One writer makes the point that in an effort to destroy completely the structures that have been built up in the African society and to impose their imperialism with an unnerving totality, the colonists were not satisfied merely with holding a people in their grip and emptying the native's brain of all form and content. They turned to the past of the oppressed people and distorted, disfigured, and destroyed it. No longer was reference made to African culture. It became barbarism. Africa was the quote-unquote dark continent. Religious practices and customs were referred to as superstition. The history of African society was reduced to tribal battles and internecine wars. There was no conscious migration by the people from one place of abode to another. No, it was always flight from one tyrant who wanted to defeat the tribe, not for any positive reason, but merely to wipe them out of the face of this earth. No wonder the African child learns to hate his heritage in his days at school. So negative is the image presented to him that he tends to find solace only in the close identification with the white society. No doubt, therefore, part of the approach envisaged in bringing about black consciousness has to be directed to the past, to seek to rewrite the history of the black man and to produce in it the heroes who form the core of the African background. To the extent that a vast literature about Gandhi in South Africa is accumulating, it can be said that the Indian community already has started in this direction. but only scant reference is made to African heroes. A people without a positive history is like a vehicle without an engine. Their emotions cannot be easily controlled and channeled in a recognizable direction. They always live in the shadow of a more successful society. Hence, in a country like ours, they are forced to celebrate holidays like Paul Kruger's Day, Heroes' Day, Republic Day, etc., all of which are occasions during which the humiliation of defeat is at once revived. Then too, one can extract from our indigenous cultures a lot of positive virtues which should teach the Westerner a lesson or two. The oneness of community, for instance, is at the heart of our culture. The easiness with which Africans communicate with each other is not forced by authority, but is inherent in the makeup of African people. Thus, whereas the white family can stay in an area without knowing its neighbors, Africans develop a sense of belonging to the community within a short time of coming together. Many a hospital official has been confounded by the practice of Indians who bring gifts and presents to patients whose names they can hardly recall. Again, this is a manifestation of the interrelationship between man and man in the black world, as opposed to the highly impersonal world in which Whitey lives. These are characteristics we must not allow ourselves to lose. Their value can only be appreciated by those of us who have not as yet been made slaves to technology and the machine. One can quote a myriad of other examples. Here again, black consciousness seeks to show the black people the value of their own standards and outlook. It urges black people to judge themselves according to these standards and not to be fooled by white society who have whitewashed themselves and made white standards the yardstick by which even black people judge each other. It is probably necessary at this stage to warn all and sundry about the limits of endurance of the human mind. This is particularly necessary in the case of the African people. Ground for a revolution is always fertile in the presence of absolute destitution. At some stage, one can foresee a situation where black people will feel they have nothing to live for and will shout unto their God, "Thy will be done." Indeed, his will shall be done, but it shall not appeal equally to all mortals, for indeed we have different versions of his will. If the white God has been doing the talking all along, at some stage the black God will have to raise his voice and make himself heard over and above noises from his counterpart. What happens at this stage depends largely on what happens in the intervening period. Black consciousness therefore seeks to give positivity in the outlook of the black people to their problems. It works on the knowledge that white hatred is negative, though understandable, and leads to precipitate and shotgun methods which may be disastrous for black and white alike. It seeks to channel the pent-up forces of the angry black masses to meaningful and directional opposition, basing its entire struggle on realities of the situation. It wants to ensure a singularity of purpose in the minds of the black people and to make possible total involvement of the masses in a struggle essentially theirs. What of the white man's religion, Christianity? It seems the people involved in imparting Christianity to the black people steadfastly refuse to get rid of the rotten foundation which many of the missionaries created when they came. To this date, black people find no message for them in the Bible simply because our ministers are still too busy with moral trivialities. They blow these up as the most important things that Jesus had to say to people. They constantly urge the people to find fault in themselves, and by doing so, detract from the essence of the struggle in which the people are involved. Deprived of spiritual content, the black people read the Bible with a gullibility that is shocking. While they sing in a chorus of Mea Culpa, they are joined by white groups who sing a different version, Tua Culpa. The anachronism of a well-meaning God who allows people to suffer continually under an obviously immoral system is not lost to young blacks who continue to drop out of church by the hundreds. Too many people are involved in religion for the blacks to ignore. Obviously, the only path open for us now is to redefine the message in the Bible and to make it relevant to the struggling masses. The Bible must not be seen to preach that all authority is divinely instituted. It must rather preach that it is a sin to allow oneself to be oppressed. The Bible must continually be shown to have something to say to the black man to keep him going in his long journey towards realization of the self. This is the message implicit in quote-unquote black theology. Black theology seeks to do away with spiritual poverty of the black people. It seeks to demonstrate the absurdity of the assumption by whites that quote-unquote ancestor worship was necessarily a superstition and that Christianity is a scientific religion. While basing itself on the Christian message, black theology seeks to show that Christianity is an adaptable religion that fits in with the cultural situation of the people to whom it is imparted. Black theology seeks to depict Jesus as a fighting God who saw the exchange of Roman money, the oppressor's coinage, in his father's temple as so sacrilegious that it merited a violent reaction from him, the Son of Man. Thus, in all fields, black consciousness seeks to talk to the black man in a language that is his own. It is only by recognizing the basic setup in the black world that one will come to realize the urgent need for a reawakening of the sleeping masses. Black consciousness seeks to do this. Needless to say, it shall have to be the black people themselves who shall take care of this program. For indeed, Sekou Toure was right when he said, quote, "To take part in the African Revolution, it is not enough to write a revolutionary song. You must fashion the revolution with the people. And if you fashion it with the people, the songs will come by themselves and of themselves. In order to achieve real action, you must yourself be a living part of Africa and of her thought. You must be an element of that popular energy which is entirely called forth for the freeing, the progress, and the happiness of Africa. There is no place outside that fight for the artist or for the intellectual who is not himself concerned with and completely at one with the people in the great battle of Africa and of suffering humanity." Frank Talk. Chapter 7. Fragmentation of the Black Resistance. This article from the SASO, South African Students Organization, newsletter of June 1971 deals with the problem faced by black leaders, whether African, colored, or Indian, of working, quote-unquote, within the system. The system being the whole white racist apartheid structure built up by the nationalists since 1948. Over and over again, the pattern of resistance to the apartheid-created structures has been the same. First, open and defined rejection. Second, sullen acquiescence and reluctant collaboration, lastly, capitulation and corruption. The system operates with a cruel relentlessness and also with seductive bribery, hence the quote-unquote success of Chief Matanzima's ruling party in the Transkei, alluded to by Steve in one of the closing paragraphs of this article. Of particular interest here is the reference in the last paragraph, but to the amount of quote-unquote community work that needs to be done in promoting a spirit of self-reliance. This article was written a year before Steve decided to devote himself full-time to this kind of work by joining Black Community Programs, or BCP. It would be instructive to compare the consistent integrity of all Steve's writings and attitudes on this key issue of working within the system with the utterances over a comparable period of time of any other black politician. I write what I like. Fragmentation of the black resistance. Just who can be regarded as representative of black opinion in South Africa? This question often crosses my mind in many conversations with people throughout the country and on reading various newspaper reports on what blacks have to say on topical matters. Once more, the issue was highlighted during the debate on whether or not to celebrate the 10th anniversary of the Republic of South Africa. On the one hand, Mr. Pat Puvlangam in Durban was urging the Indian people to celebrate, whilst on the other, people like Mr. Miwa Ramgobin and the Labour Party argued the case against celebration. In Zululand, Chief Gacha Buthelezi stated that the Zulu people would celebrate, whilst elsewhere pamphlets were distributed from various black sources reminding the people that they would be celebrating the countless sins of the nationalist government. The interesting thing, of course, was the conspicuous silence of the urban African people, except for the hushed objections of Soweto's UBC. Footnote: Urban Bantu Council. End of footnote. Not at any stage did anybody state a representative opinion. Anyone staying in South Africa will not be completely surprised by this. Political opinion is probably very clear-cut on issues of this nature amongst the African people especially. However, since the banning and harassment of black political parties, a dangerous vacuum has been created. The African National Congress and later the Pan-African Congress were banned in 1960. The Indian Congress was routed out of existence, and ever since then, there has been no coordinated opinion emanating from the black ranks. Perhaps the Kliptown Charter, objectionable as the circumstances surrounding it might have been, was the last attempt ever made to instill some amount of positiveness in stating categorically what blacks felt on political questions in the land of their forefathers. After the banning of the black political parties in South Africa, people's hearts were gripped by some kind of foreboding fear for anything political. Not only were politics a closed book, but at every corner one was greeted by a slave-like apathy that often bordered on timidity. To anyone living in the black world, the hidden anger and turmoil could always be seen shining through the faces and actions of these voiceless masses, but it was never verbalized. Even the active phase, thuggery and vandalism, was directed to one's kind. a clear manifestation of frustration. To make it worse, no real hope was offered by the output from the recently created black universities. Sons and fathers alike were concerned about cutting themselves a niche in a situation from which they saw no hope of escaping. After this brief spell of silence, during which political activity was mainly taken up by liberals, blacks started dabbling with the dangerous theory, that of working within the system. This attitude was exploited to the full by the Nationalist Party. Thus, the respectability of Matanzima's Transkei was greatly boosted by Ndamse's decision to join hands with him. Clearly, Ndamse, being a one-time banned man, convinced many people by his decision that there was something to be gained out of these apartheid institutions. Soon thereafter, the Colored Labor Party, operating on an anti-apartheid ticket, was formed to oppose the pro-apartheid Federal Party within the all-colored Representative Council. People's logic became strangely twisted. Said a member of the Transkei's opposition Democratic Party, quote, "We know that the Transkeian Parliament is a stooge body. We ask you to elect us to that stooge body." But it seemed that nothing influenced people more to accept the quote-unquote working within the system theory than the decision by Chief Gacha Buthelezi to join in and lead the Zulu Territorial Authority. Chief Gacha Buthelezi had for a long time been regarded as the bastion of resistance to the institution of a terrible authority in Zululand. Then one morning a newspaper intimated that he might just agree to take it up, and within weeks Chief Gacha Buthelezi was indeed the chief executive officer of the Zululand Territorial Authority. Following the capitulation of Chief Gacha Buthelezi, a burst of activity manifested itself in these apartheid institutions. On the one hand, the Labour Party was making full use of the sanctified platform, the CRC, to air their grievances against the government. On the other, Chief Gacha was fast becoming an embarrassment to the government with the kinds of things he was saying. I believe it is just here that the confusion over who are the leaders of the black world began to arise. Because of the increased verbalization of black man's complaints, the people, especially the white world, began to take these various voices as speaking on behalf of and as leaders of the black world. This kind of picture was particularly built up by the English press, who followed in detail everything people like Chief Gacha Buthelezi did and said. Of course, in the absence of any organized opinion, it began to sound, even to some black people themselves, as if this were the case. The fact that Matanzima also joined in the bandwagon of militant demands had made everyone sit back and clap. People argue that the nationalists have been caught in their own game. The black lion is beginning to raise its voice. This is a gross oversimplification. What in fact is happening is that the black world is beginning to be completely fragmented, and that people are beginning to talk sectional politics. I would rather like to believe that this was foreseen long ago by the Nationalist Party, and that it is in fact a part of the program. After the kind of noises made by Buthelezi, the Labour Party, and of late Matanzima, who can argue that black opinion is being stifled in South Africa? Moreover, any visitor is made to see that these people are fighting for more concessions in their own area, 13% of the land. They accept that the rest of South Africa is for whites. Also, none of them sees himself as fighting the battle for all black people. NUSAS want their Transkei, the Zulus their Zululand, etc. Colored people harbor secret hopes of being classified as brown Afrikaners, and therefore meriting admittance into the white lager, while Indian people might be given a vote to swell the buffer zone between whites and Africans. Of course, these promises will never be fulfilled, at least not in a hurry, and in the meantime, the enemy bestrides South Africa like a colossus, laughing aloud at the fragmented attempts by the powerless masses, making appeals to his deaf ears. The Transkei is the Achilles heel of the nationalist claim in intellectual politicians who are always quick to see a loophole even in a 2-foot-thick iron wall. This is false logic. The Transkei, the CRC, Zululand, and all these other apartheid institutions are modern-type lagers behind which the whites in this country are going to hide themselves for a long time to come. Slowly the ground is being swept off from under our feet, and soon we as blacks will believe completely that our political rights are in fact in our own areas. Therefore, we shall find that we have no leg to stand on in making demands for any rights in quote-unquote mainland white South Africa, which incidentally will comprise more than 3/4 of the land of our forefathers. This is the major danger that I see facing the black community at the moment. To be so conditioned by the system as to make even our most well-considered resistance to fit within the system, both in terms of the means and of the goals. Witness the new swing amongst leaders of the Indian community in Durban. I must admit, I say this with pain in my heart. Ever since word was let loose that the Indian Council will at some near future be elected, a number of intelligent people are thinking of reviving the Indian Congress and letting it form some kind of opposition within the system. This is dangerous retrogressive thinking which should be given no breathing space. These apartheid institutions are swallowing too many good people who would be useful in a meaningful program of emancipation of the black people. Who are the leaders of the black world then, if they are not to be found in the apartheid institution? Clearly, black people know that their leaders are these people who are now either in Robben Island or in banishment or in exile, voluntary or otherwise. People like Mandela, Sobukwe, Kathrada, M.D. Naidu, and many others will always have a place of honor in our minds as the true leaders of the people. They may have been branded communist, saboteurs, or similar names. In fact, they may have been convicted of similar offenses in law courts, but this does not subtract from the real essence of their worth. These were people who acted with a dedication unparalleled in modern times. Their concern with our plight as black people made them gain the natural support of the mass of black people. We may disagree with some things they did, but know that they spoke the language of the people. Does this necessarily mean that I see absolutely no advantage in the present setup? Unless the political astuteness of the black people involved in these various apartheid institutions is further sharpened, I am afraid we are fast approaching an impasse. The new generation may be right in accusing us of collaboration in our own destruction. In Germany, the petty officials who decided on which Jews were to be taken away were also Jews. Ultimately, Hitler's gangs also came for them. As soon as the dissident factors outside the apartheid institutions are completely silenced, they will come for those who make noise inside the system. Once that happens, the boundaries of our world will forever be the circumference of the 13% black spots. Perhaps one should be a little positive at this stage. I completely discourage the movement of people from left to join the institutions of apartheid. In laying out a strategy, we often have to take cognizance of the enemy's strength, and as far as I can assess, all of us who want to fight within the system are completely underestimating the influence the system has on us. What seems to me to be logical at this stage is for the left to continually pressurize the various apartheid institutions to move in the direction of testing the limits of possibility within the system, to prove the whole game a sham, and to break off the system. I will take the example of the Labour Party because it sounds as the most well-organized dissident group in the system. The colored Labour Party stood for elections on an anti-apartheid ticket and won most of the elected seats. Further, the Labour Party wasted no time in spelling out its anti-apartheid stance and revived political activity to a great extent within the colored community. In fact, the growing consciousness of the possibility of political action amongst the colored people is due to the Labour Party. Pretty soon the Labour Party will find that it is singing the same tune, and whatever they say will cease to be of news value. In the meantime, Tom Schwartz will start making demands for the colored people and will probably gain a few concessions. The colored people will then realize that in fact a positive stand like that of Tom Schwartz is more welcome than a negative attitude like that of the Labour Party, who keep on saying the same things. Then the Labour Party will start falling into disfavor. This is not just theoretical. It has happened in the past with Matanzima and Guzana in the Transkei. Guzana's party, once the pride of dissident Transkeians who wanted to demonstrate their rejection of the system, has now been relegated to the background, operating even on the right of Matanzima's party, whose militant demands are being seen as a more meaningful opposition to the system than a rehashed debate on the protection of white interests in the Transkei. Therefore, I see the real value of the Labour Party being in galvanizing its forces now, organizing them and pulling out of the colored representative council together with the support of all the colored people. The longer they stay in the CRC, the more they risk being irrelevant. Pull out and do what? This is the next question. There is a lot of community work that needs to be done in promoting a spirit of self-reliance and the black consciousness among all black people in South Africa. This is what the Labour Party should resort to doing. By now they have sufficiently demonstrated that the CRC is rejected by the colored people. Further operation within the system may only lead to political castration and a creation of an quote-unquote "I am a colored" attitude, which will prove a setback to the black man's program of emancipation and will create major obstacles in the establishment of a non-racial society once our problems are settled. This to me sounds the only way of turning a disadvantage into an advantage. It is true of not only the Labour Party, but also of all black people of conscience who are now operating within the system. Thus, in an effort to maintain our solidarity and relevance to the situation, we must resist all attempts at the fragmentation of our resistance. Black people must recognize the various institutions of apartheid for what they are: gags intended to get black people fighting separately for certain freedoms and gains which were prescribed for them long ago. We must refuse to accept it as inevitable that the only political action the blacks may take is through these institutions. Granted that it may be more attractive and even safer to join the system, we must still recognize that in doing so, we are well on the way towards selling our souls. Frank Talk.